Somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, 3,980 meters below the surface, a titanium box has been sitting in the dark for years. It recorded everything aboard Air France Flight 447, the last altitude reading, the last airspeed, the last words spoken in that cockpit before 228 people hit the water at full speed. It took 2 years to find. When investigators finally cracked it open, part of the recording was gone. Damaged by seawater corrosion, the official report stated. Irretrievable. That segment of audio, gone. The rest of the device was in perfect condition. That specific recorder is engineered to resist oceanic pressure and saltwater exposure for decades. Selective corrosion of precisely the critical window has never occurred in any other recovered flight recorder in the history of commercial aviation. That is one case. There are 10 military and government-linked aircraft that disappeared under circumstances so technically anomalous that the nations involved sealed their files rather than explain them. Some of those seals do not expire until 2055. Some carry no expiration date at all. There are radar logs for what I am about to describe. There are radio transcripts. There is a photograph taken at the exact moment of one disappearance. There are 2,000 military witnesses to another. And in every single case, the aftermath follows the same pattern. Evidence is removed from civilian inquiry, reports are quietly revised, or search operations are quietly converted into something that requires military hardware, military personnel, and military silence. There is also a system, a network of hydrophones running along the seafloor beneath every major ocean on the planet since 1954. The United States Navy built it to track Soviet submarines. What it has also been doing, quietly, continuously, for 70 years, is listening for aircraft. Every large object that hits open water generates a low-frequency acoustic signature that travels through the deep sound channel for thousands of kilometers. The system logs it. The analysts identify it. The record is sealed. If you can hear a plane crash from 4,000 kilometers away, why do planes keep disappearing without a trace? That question has 10 answers. None of them are satisfying. All of them are documented. 6:18 in the evening, November 23, 1953. A radar operator inside Calumet Air Force Station on Michigan's Upper Peninsula watches his screen when a single blip appears over the southern edge of Lake Superior. No filed flight plan, no response to radio contact, no identification. A Northrop F-89C Scorpion, tail number 51-5853, is scrambled from Kinross Air Force Base. At the controls, First Lieutenant Felix Moncla, 27 years old, 18 months of active intercept experience. Behind him, Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson, radar intercept officer. Ground controllers track both marks. Moncla's Scorpion closing steady, the unidentified object holding course. For 31 minutes, the two blips crawl toward each other across the luminous green face of the radar scope. Then something occurs that has no entry in the United States Air Force Interception Training Manual. The two marks converge, not collide, not pass through one another. They merge. They occupy the same coordinates simultaneously. They sit there together for a moment. Then the single remaining mark exits the picture entirely, past the edge of the radar's range. No emergency broadcast. No distress call, no wreckage. Lake Superior is shallow enough in that sector that any large debris field would have been visible within days. The Air Force told journalists that Moncla had been pursuing a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47 Skytrain transport that had accidentally strayed off course. The Royal Canadian Air Force issued a formal statement. They had no aircraft in that airspace that night. The original explanation was withdrawn. No replacement was offered. Within 40 minutes of the disappearance, the National Security Agency, the United States Signals Intelligence Directorate, declared a Bravo hangar alert. That designation is not issued for crashed aircraft. It is issued when classified communication systems may have been observed or compromised. The Calumet radar logs from that evening are available. The analysis file that accompanied them was transferred to a facility whose name was redacted before the transfer records were released under information access requests. 42 minutes after the Scorpion should have struck water, a transmission was received on Moncla's assigned frequency. The operators at Calumet confirmed the voice pattern. Felix Moncla had been missing for 42 minutes. There is no mechanical explanation for that transmission. Signal propagation anomalies do not produce voice patterns from wreckage at the bottom of a lake. Either the record is falsified, or the timeline is wrong, or something else happened over Lake Superior on November 23rd. Something the National Security Agency considered worth a cryptological emergency designation for a single missing interceptor over a body of water it could have searched in 3 days. The voice, the merged blip, the Canadian aircraft that never existed, the cryptological alert for a plane crash. Pick the detail that bothers you most, because the official record has an answer for none of them. The cause of the Kinross incident remains classified. The analysis file has no scheduled release date, and Felix Moncla's name appears in no military casualty record, because the Air Force has never formally determined that he died. The final investigation report on the disappearance of Flight 19 was 500 pages long. In its original form, the conclusion read, "Pilot error." In the revised form, rewritten after Lieutenant Commander Charles Taylor's family filed a formal objection, the conclusion read, "Cause unknown." A 500-page document was changed in its single most consequential finding. No explanation for the revision was published. Now, rewind to December 5, 1945. Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station, Florida. 5 General Motors TBM Avenger torpedo bombers lift off at 2:14 in the afternoon for Navigation Task 1, a triangular training route, bombing practice at Hen and Chicken Shoals, northeast of the Bahamas, and return to base. 14 men total, enough fuel for 5.5 hours. Clear skies, flat sea, familiar water. The lead instructor was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, 2,500 hours of flight time. He had flown that exact route before. 50 minutes in, Taylor radioed base. "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." His student pilots knew exactly where they were. They argued with him over the radio. "Turn west," they told him. "West is home." And Taylor, with 25 times their flight experience, overruled them and flew east, directly away from the coast, into the open Atlantic. Every compass on every aircraft had failed. 5 separate instruments, 5 separate planes, all deflected in the same direction at the same moment. Taylor's own words, "Everything looks strange, even the ocean." A rescue PBM Mariner flying boat launched with 13 men aboard. It exploded 23 minutes after takeoff. Search teams found a fuel slick, but nothing to confirm identity. 248 aircraft and 18 ships swept 200,000 square miles. They found nothing from Flight 19. No instrument panel, no seat, no radio housing, no human remains. The water in most of that search zone was under 30 meters deep. The Hen and Chicken Shoals area was, at that time, an active calibration zone for experimental electromagnetic detection systems being developed by the Naval Research Laboratory as part of post-war radio frequency reallocation testing. The frequencies under test were documented to cause interference in analog compass mechanisms, the exact type installed in TBM Avengers. No official documentation connects those tests to the disappearance of Flight 19. The electromagnetic calibration program records for that sector, that month, remain restricted. The rescue plane exploded. The compasses failed simultaneously. The experienced instructor described an ocean that looked wrong, and the report that blamed him was quietly changed to say, "We don't know." October 21st, 1978, Bass Strait, Australia. A Cessna 182L, registration VH-DSJ, with 1 pilot aboard, cruising at 1,500 meters, en route to King Island. The pilot was Frederick Valentich, 20 years old. He had twice failed his commercial pilot license examinations. He was, by official metrics, an unremarkable student aviator. At 1906, he contacted Melbourne Flight Service. "Is there any known traffic below 5,000? He asked. Controller Steve Roby confirmed no known traffic in the area. Over the next 6 minutes, Valentich described what he was observing with the technical precision of an accident investigator, not a confused student. 4 bright lights, a shiny metal surface, an object performing repeated high-speed passes directly above his aircraft, hovering, accelerating without transitional movement, orbiting his position. He was calm, sequential. His descriptions were spatial, dimensional, behavioral. Then, it seems to me that he's playing some sort of game. Then, he's flying over me, 2, 3 times at speeds I cannot identify. Then, the last words before 17 seconds of a sound described in the official Department of Transport investigation as a metallic, scraping noise unlike any recorded mechanical failure, engine signature, or atmospheric phenomenon in the agency's audio archives. It is not an aircraft. No wreckage from VHDSJ was ever recovered. In 1983, a fragment of engine cowling from a Cessna 182, bearing a partial serial number consistent with Valentich's aircraft, washed ashore on King Island. Photographer Roy Manifold had been shooting the sunset from Cape Otway that same evening. In his sequence of frames, taken at the exact minute of Valentich's final transmission, one image shows a fast-moving disc-shaped object crossing the frame at low altitude. Manifold had no awareness of the incident in the air above him. He developed the film later. The Australian Security Intelligence Organisation opened a file on the incident the following morning. That file is sealed until 2027. I have listened to those final transmissions more times than is reasonable, and here is what I keep returning to. A young man who failed his licensing exams twice is not supposed to be useful as an observer. But listen to those 6 minutes. He is not frightened. He is not confused. He is running a methodical, spatial description. Surface finish, relative position, behavioral pattern, approximate velocity, while something sits above him in the dark. That is not a panicking student. That is someone who has decided that the most important thing he can do in the time he has left is get the information out accurately. The metallic sound, nearly 50 years, still unclassified as any known failure mode, still in a restricted intelligence file. A student pilot's last transmission shouldn't require an intelligence agency to manage, unless what he described in those 6 minutes had nothing to do with being a student. June 24, 1950. Northwest Airlines Flight 2501. A Douglas DC-4 with 55 passengers and 3 crew, departed New York, bound for Seattle. Last radio contact at 11:51 in the evening, over Lake Michigan, 45 kilometers off the Wisconsin coast. At midnight, the aircraft disappeared. Searchers reached the area before dawn. They found seat cushions, clothing fragments, personal effects, human tissue, floating in pieces across the surface. They did not find a wing. They did not find an engine. They did not find a single piece of fuselage larger than a suitcase. The Berrien County prosecutor who oversaw the recovery operation stated publicly that the bodies had been disintegrated as if by an explosion of unprecedented force. No fuel load, no cargo manifest. Nothing aboard that DC-4 could have produced disintegration at that scale. In the decades that followed, modern side-scan sonar surveys mapped the lake bed in the search corridor. No major structural component of the Douglas DC-4 has been located. In 75 years of looking, the primary metal structure of a 4-engine airliner has never been found. Some of the passengers were partially recovered. Their remains were buried in unmarked sections of Riverview Cemetery in St. Joseph, Michigan. The location of those graves was not disclosed to any family. The families found out in 2008. 58 years after the crash, parents' children were located in a cemetery no one had been told existed. The day after Flight 2501 disappeared, June 25, 1950, North Korea crossed the 38th parallel. The Korean War began. Every newspaper that had run the airline story on its front page moved it inside within 24 hours. The largest commercial aviation disaster in United States history at that time was buried by the start of a war. Within a week, the story was gone. Within a month, the search was formally reduced in scope. Within a year, the official investigation was closed without a determination of cause. In the months preceding the crash, the United States Navy had been running classified trials of hydrophone detection equipment in Lake Michigan, early prototypes of what would become the sound surveillance system. The test grid centered on coordinates that included the flight path of Northwest 2501. No official documentation connects the two programs. The Navy's records for that test protocol from June of 1950 are incomplete. The Navy acoustic test grid for Lake Michigan, June 1950. The unmarked graves at Riverview Cemetery, the Korean War that started the morning after and pulled every headline in a different direction. 3 things that do not belong in the same sentence. 3 things that happened in the same 72 hours. Robert Lynn's family searched for him for 58 years. He was 20 minutes away, under a stone with no name on it. They were never told. March 5, 1966, Japan. A British Overseas Airways Corporation Boeing 707, Flight 911. 113 passengers, 11 crew, perfectly maintained, experienced captain, visibility unlimited in every direction. The captain requested a low-altitude scenic routing near Mount Fuji. 11 minutes later, at 4,900 meters over Gotemba, the vertical stabilizer, the large upright tail fin that provides directional control, separated from the aircraft. Clean separation. The fuselage broke apart in the air. All 124 people aboard were dead before the first fragment reached the forest below. Not a single cloud in the sky. One passenger had been filming with an 8mm camera. The footage exists. It captures the approach to Fuji, a sharp, invisible impact, then 2 blank frames. Then the recording ends. A United States Navy search aircraft, sent to map the debris site, entered the same airspace. Its instruments recorded acceleration loads oscillating between +9 gravities and -4 gravities within a span of seconds. 9 gravities will crack structural steel. The search aircraft returned to base with bent airframe members. A mountain wave is an invisible column of air that forms on the lee side of a high peak when wind exceeds a critical speed. It moves vertically. It has no visual signature. You cannot see it, and you cannot outfly it in the second between entering and being torn apart. At the velocities involved on March 5th, the force acting on the Boeing's tail fin would have exceeded the aircraft's design limit load in under 2 seconds. The wing roots, the fuselage joins, the empennage attachment points, all failing simultaneously, from the outside in, with no warning to the crew. That is the official account, and it is physically coherent. Behind this is a detail the official accident report does not address cleanly. The day before the BOAC crash, a different airliner had gone down at the same airport. The crew of Flight 911 drove past the still-burning wreckage on their way to their aircraft that morning. They saw it. They boarded anyway. In the 5 days preceding March 5, 1966, 5 aircraft were destroyed in the vicinity of Mount Fuji, all in clear weather. The Japanese Aviation Authority noted the clustering, but attributed it to seasonal atmospheric conditions. Japanese military radar data covering that altitude and heading for March 5th was partially excluded from the public investigation. The exclusion was attributed to national security considerations. The inquiry board noted the exclusion and moved forward without the data. That is worth sitting with for a moment. A civilian accident investigation into the structural failure of a commercial airliner in peacetime Japan received formal notification that military radar records from the exact time and location of the accident had been withheld on national security grounds. The board accepted this, wrote it into the report as a procedural note, and concluded the investigation anyway. The mountain wave was real. The tail came off. 124 people are buried in the forest below Gotemba. And somewhere in a Japanese Ministry of Defense archive, a radar operator's log from March 5, 1966, describes what was in that airspace, information considered sensitive enough to keep out of the investigation that was supposed to explain why those people died. The cases so far have one thing in common. An aircraft exists, something happens, the official record gets sealed. But there is another category. Aircraft that didn't vanish because of what they encountered. Aircraft that were specifically designed to make other things disappear, from radar screens, from sensor logs, from the picture of what was happening in a given stretch of sky. To understand what gets hidden, it helps first to understand what can be erased. Somewhere over the Tatar Strait, 1978, an Aleutian IL-20, known to Western intelligence as the Coot-A, is cruising at altitude with its transponder showing the code of a commercial turboprop flight. From the outside, the aircraft is unremarkable. 4 engines, high-set tail, a row of oval windows that look like they should have passengers behind them. They don't. Behind those windows, the ROM electronic intelligence suite and a side-looking radar that can map warship positions from 200 kilometers away, while the aircraft stays well outside the range of anything designed to shoot it down. The crew works in near total silence. They never transmit on the frequencies they're recording. They pass over a fleet, and the fleet does not know what it just told them. There is a second capability, detailed in Soviet military documents declassified in the 1990s. The IL-20 could broadcast radar returns that, on an enemy display, looked like a formation of fighter aircraft, not one plane. Between 10 and 20 simultaneous contacts, all moving coherently, all reading as combat aircraft at combat speed. A single turboprop casting the shadow of an airstrike. In the spring of 1978, the United States Navy's 7th Fleet was running exercises in the Sea of Japan with a new integrated air defense network, a system designed to track dozens of aerial contacts simultaneously and feed targeting solutions to surface-to-air missiles in real time. It was, at that point, the most sophisticated shipboard air defense ever deployed. American records from that period, available in heavily sanitized form, show repeated anomalous contacts in the Tatar Strait sector during the months of IL-20 activity. Radar operators logged formations that appeared on their screens and then simply weren't there. One report describes a watch officer spending 40 minutes tracking an inbound contact before the contact dissolved without explanation. He filed the incident as equipment malfunction. He may have been right. He may also have just watched one man in a turboprop test whether America's newest weapons system could tell the difference between a threat and a ghost. The Soviet records that would answer that question are sealed until 2031. In March of that same year, a Soviet interceptor shot down a Korean Airlines Boeing that had drifted into restricted airspace. 2 passengers died. The incident filled weeks of diplomatic channels. It also, according to Western signals analysis from that period, coincided with a concentration of encrypted IL-20 traffic in the region that analysts found difficult to explain. Whether the airliner incident was somehow connected, or simply happened in the same charged airspace during the same period of heightened operations, is not something the available records allow anyone to conclude. What the available records do show is that the Tatar Strait in 1978 was not an empty piece of sky. It was a live experiment, and one side decided that experiment needed 53 more years of protection. April 11th, 1980, 5:45 in the morning. La Jolla Air Base, Arequipa, Peru. The Andes are still dark, the runway lights are on. An object appears over the restricted airspace above the base perimeter. It hovers without sound, without navigation lights, without any of the visual signatures associated with aircraft from any nation operating in the region in 1980. It does not respond to radio contact on any frequency. Captain Oscar Santamaria Huertas, call sign Paco, receives the scramble order. He flies a Sukhoi Su-22 Fitter F, a Soviet supersonic strike aircraft with variable geometry wings. He has 17 years in the cockpit. He closed to 150 meters. At that range, the 30mm autocannon mounted in the Su-22 fires projectiles capable of penetrating light armor and reinforced structural steel. The weapon system is unambiguous. The distance is unambiguous. At 150 meters with an autocannon, there is no margin of error. There is no scenario in which the rounds miss. He fires 64 rounds. The rounds enter the object's surface. There is no impact spray, no deformation trail, no secondary debris, no visible effect of any kind. The object's surface accepts the projectiles the way water accepts rain. The object is shaped like a light bulb. Cream-colored upper section, silver metallic lower section. No wings, no engine exhaust, no control surfaces. 2,000 soldiers and officers of La Jolla Air Base are watching from the ground. Their written testimonies fill an official Peruvian Air Force report that runs to hundreds of pages. The object departed at an acceleration that Captain Santamaria described. In sworn testimony, he has repeated without variation for 40 years, as inconsistent with any propulsion technology available in 1980, or available now. The Peruvian government classified the complete investigation in 1980. The classification period, 75 years. The seal expires in 2055. Now, I've read every available version of this account. Here's what I keep returning to. Santamaria did not speculate. He did not editorialize. He filed a military incident report. He described, with the clinical detachment of an experienced combat aviator, a physical engagement. The weapon used, the range, the number of rounds, the observed outcome. He has testified before international aerospace conferences. His account has never contained a contradiction. You don't lock a hallucination in a vault for 75 years. You classify evidence. Most of the cases in this video involve an aircraft that exists, flies, and fails to return. But there is a predecessor to every classified program. A moment when someone tested the edge of what was possible and then buried the test. The XF-92 matters not because it vanished from the sky, but because it vanished from the record, and everything that came after it was built on what the record is not allowed to show. In 1952, the Consolidated Vultee Aircraft Corporation, Convair, completed the first jet aircraft in the world designed entirely around a triangular wing planform. They called it the Model 7002. The United States Air Force assigned it the designation XF-92. One was built. The testing program, conducted at Edwards Air Force Base under National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics Oversight, that agency later became the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was declared a success by the engineers running it. The aircraft flew. The delta wing performed. The data was clean. 6 months into active testing, the program was closed. In the pilot's personal correspondence, not the official program files, there are references to a behavior that does not appear in any summary document. At high G loads near the aircraft's performance ceiling, the XF-92 entered uncontrolled pitch-up maneuvers. The nose would rise without pilot input. At 8 gravities, the boundary of human consciousness, the aircraft could not be corrected by any input available to the person strapped into it. In the months following the program's formal closure, construction activity began at a remote lakebed in the Nevada desert, a facility whose existence was not officially acknowledged until 1974. The XF-92's structural geometry and the data it generated on radar cross-section reduction transferred directly into the classified research lineage that produced the F-117 stealth aircraft. A separate engineering thread runs from its lifting body research to the thermal protection architecture of the space shuttle. A single experimental aircraft, tested briefly and officially retired to a museum in Dayton, Ohio, quietly built the foundation for the 2 most significant aerospace programs of the following 3 decades. The flight records for the XF-92's final test series were classified for 40 years after the program ended. The aircraft itself sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. It is on public display. You can walk up to it, read the placard, and learn that it was a successful experimental aircraft that contributed to the development of subsequent delta wing designs. The placard does not mention the pitch-up behavior at 8 gravities. It does not mention the facility that began construction in the Nevada desert 6 months after the program closed. It does not mention that the radar cross-section reduction data from those 6 months of testing, data from a program officially classified as an aerodynamic study, fed into a research lineage that took 20 more years and produced the first aircraft the world was not supposed to be able to see. The plane that built the stealth program is sitting in a museum. The part of the story that matters is in a file that stayed classified until the stealth program was already flying combat missions. On the morning of May 25, 2003, the White House Situation Room received a notification that would remain classified for 2 years. A Boeing 727 had gone missing in Angola, not a military aircraft, a commercial airliner, registration N844AA, formerly of American Airlines Service, converted for cargo operations. The passenger seating had been removed. 10 500-gallon fuel tanks had been bolted to the cabin floor. That configuration makes it a flying bomb if the tanks rupture. The United States government knew this. President George W. Bush was receiving daily briefings about the missing aircraft. At dusk, in the parking area of Quatro de Fevereiro International Airport in Luanda, the aircraft taxied without clearance, without lights, without an active transponder. The transponder is the device that identifies an aircraft to radar systems, moving in irregular patterns before aligning with the runway and accelerating into the evening sky. 2 men were aboard: Ben Padilla, a mechanic certified on single-engine propeller aircraft, and an assistant named John Mutantu, about whom almost nothing has been verified. A Boeing 727 requires a minimum crew of 3 qualified pilots to operate under normal conditions. The aircraft departed under conditions that were not normal. For 17 months, United States intelligence agencies searched. No debris was found in the ocean. No wreckage was identified on land. A report from West African intelligence sources placed the aircraft in Guinea. The United States Department of State formally denied that sighting had been verified. The Federal Bureau of Investigation closed the case in 2005. No findings, no wreckage, no aircraft, no crew. N844AA was not unique. It was part of a documented category of aircraft, known in aviation industry circles as ghost planes, former commercial airliners acquired through complex ownership chains, stripped of identifying documentation, and operated outside normal regulatory frameworks in conflict zones. The Central Intelligence Agency's logistics infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa during the 1990s and early 2000s used aircraft matching this profile extensively. N844AA appeared in internal agency tracking lists flagged as requiring urgent location after September 2001. The declassified portions of those rosters share a specific characteristic: entries that terminate mid-sentence, reference numbers that resolve to redacted files, aircraft that appear once and then exit every system simultaneously. Not missing, scrubbed. N844AA carries exactly that signature in the records that are available. The records that aren't available are what the Federal Bureau of Investigation declined to release when the case was closed. A Boeing 727 at maximum fuel load, which this aircraft almost certainly carried, weighs over 95,000 kilograms. When an object of that mass hits the Atlantic Ocean, the impact drives a pressure wave through the water column that the sound surveillance system's hydrophone arrays, positioned along the deep sound channel, can detect from anywhere in the Atlantic basin. The analysts at the Naval Ocean Processing Facility would have had a precise location within minutes of the event. No such detection was reported. No debris was ever found. A flying object that weighs as much as a small office building, disappearing into an ocean equipped with the most sensitive acoustic surveillance network ever built, leaving not a trace that any government has chosen to make public. Either the aircraft is sitting intact in a location that required no announcement, or the network heard something and the record was removed. Both possibilities require the same uncomfortable conclusion. Someone has known for over 20 years where that aircraft went, and they have said nothing. 2009, an Airbus A330 carrying 228 people from Rio de Janeiro to Paris encounters the intertropical convergence zone over the equatorial Atlantic in the middle of the night. The pitot tubes, the sensors that measure airspeed, ice over and fail. The autopilot disconnects. The crew, who had never trained for manual high-altitude stall recovery in those specific conditions, lose the aircraft. It enters a stall it cannot recover from, and strikes the ocean at close to 200 knots. That much is established. That much is not disputed. The search for the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, the two devices known as black boxes, took 2 years, 4 months, and 3 separate operations. The first 2 phases used civilian contractors. The final phase deployed United States and French Navy assets, operating the Remus 6000 autonomous underwater vehicle. Those vehicles have a documented secondary capability: high-resolution bathymetric mapping for military seafloor surveys. The search for the recorders gave the military legal access to a section of abyssal Atlantic that had not previously been surveyed. The recorders were recovered, opened, analyzed. The flight data recorder yielded 90% of its stored information without significant degradation. The altitude sequence, the airspeed trace, the pitch angles, the control inputs. The cockpit voice recorder had experienced selective corrosion damage. The degraded portion corresponded precisely to the window between the autopilot's disengagement and the moment the crew first verbalized the stall. That specific window, the one that would show what happened in the cockpit when the pilots first understood what they were dealing with. Gone. The Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, the French Accident Investigation Agency, attributed the accident to crew mismanagement of an aerodynamic stall at high altitude. That finding has never been publicly challenged by Airbus or by the French government. The sound surveillance system detected the impact. The hydrophone data was analyzed by teams at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts and by French naval acoustic specialists. They found nothing anomalous. They published their findings in full, without restriction. So the ocean heard it clearly. The recorders documented it almost completely. Only that specific gap, Those minutes when the crew first encountered whatever they encountered is missing, corroded, in the one device built specifically to survive exactly those conditions. Now step back. Flight 447 is the least conspiratorial case in this video. It has a transparent investigation, a published final report, no secret military program in the background, two governments with every reason to be straightforward. And even here, even in the most open, fully resourced, modern aviation inquiry, the single window that would settle the deepest question is the one that was lost. The same missing window, the same sealed sector, every time. The sound surveillance system has been listening to every major ocean since 1954. It can hear an aircraft impact the water from 4,000 kilometers away and triangulate the position to within 3 miles. The Navy used it to find a sunken Soviet submarine before the Soviet Union could find it themselves. If it can do that, it heard every aircraft in this video that went into open water. Those records have not been made public. History does not lose aircraft. It reclassifies them. You watch 10 cases across 80 years and noticed a pattern. The classified material is never random. It tracks too precisely. Always the radar data from the exact sector. Always the voice recording from the exact critical window. Always the search results from the area where the debris should be. That pattern could be coincidence, bureaucratic habit, institutional overcaution applied bluntly to records that happen to contain sensitive adjacencies. That explanation is available. It just requires you to believe that across 8 decades, 5 separate governments, and 10 unconnected incidents, the instinct to classify landed on the same type of evidence every single time. Pick the case that troubles you most. Make the argument in the comments. The strongest case gets pinned. 3 cases didn't make this list. If enough of you land on the same flight, there's a part 2. Subscribe. Some of these files have dates on them. When they open, you want to already know what questions to ask.